Welcome everybody to our May 2026 briefing to Audit and Risk Committee chairs. I'd like to acknowledge that the land that we meet on today is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting or attending from other areas of South Australia or Australia. It's great to see such a great group of people here again today. Your continued attendance, I think, reinforces to us how important this forum is, this forum and the one we hold again later in the year. In terms of today's agenda, we're hoping we've put together some interesting presentations that will help you as you embark upon your ARC work this year. We have guest speaker Matt Moffat from Treasury and Finance, who's leading the Finance Reform Program, a very important program and one that you should all be interested in. Daniel O'Donoghue's going to talk to us about financial audit, Salve's going to talk to us about performance audit, and Andrew Corrigan's going to talk to us about issues affecting data and technology. We'll have some morning tea, and then after morning tea, we're very lucky to have as a guest speaker John Chapman, industry advocate, who's going to talk about key matters for audit and risk committees and give us a little bit of an update, I think, as well on how things are going up in Whyalla. I want to take the opportunity this morning in my presentation to talk about environmental matters and how they're impacting upon control, compliance and risk management in government as I see it at the moment. I unashamedly look at things through a particular lens, directed by Public Finance and Audit Act requirements, financial statement accuracy, controls and legal compliance. Ultimately, why we look at these things is to make government more transparent, trusted and valued, and ultimately to make government better. The presentation I've put together this morning, I suppose, has been put together with a backdrop of sort of the following environmental factors, each of which I see has a potential to adversely impact or change the effectiveness of controls, compliance measures and risk management. And they're things I see coming or present in the current year. I think it's fair to say, although we don't know what the budget looks like that will be released next week, what we're seeing in other jurisdictions is the increase in savings measures, efficiency measures in government. I think it's reasonable to assume that we'll see a similar landscape for the state government. We continue to see skill shortages, and certainly our discussions with universities are such that we know that financially literate people coming out of universities it's reducing. So unis are talking about down to almost 40% of previous production of skilled graduates coming out of universities. We know we've got new systems and processes coming, including the Financial Reform Program, which means changing processes and changing understanding of our people, of the processes and systems they're using, and in some cases, some workarounds which introduce risk to our compliance and controls. We know coming out of an election that we have high delivery expectations from government, which comes with it risks in cutting corners and reduction in compliance. We've got a report coming out in the next month or so around legacy systems, which show that government departments and government agencies continue to face the prospect of ongoing legacy systems which increase risk. And we have the emergence of AI, both impacting and replacing processes, AI emerging in decision making, all with the potential to dramatically change risk profiles of agencies. So what I propose to do is walk through what I see as challenges for audit and risk committees across these themes. I'll open with a general context and a discussion of recurring South Australian audit themes, and I'll break down the challenges into three broad areas: leadership, culture and accountability, IT controls and system change risks, financial controls and data integrity, and then I'll close out the discussion with a summary on monitoring capability and what I think it means for Audit and Risk Committee priorities. Our audit reports consistently identify a small number of recurring themes that adversely impact internal control, compliance, legal compliance and effective risk management across agencies. These themes are not typically the result of absent frameworks or policies, rather they reflect weaknesses in execution, monitoring and accountability. Commonly reported issues include persistent IT control deficiencies, particularly in user access, privilege access management, weaknesses in core financial controls such as reconciliations and review processes, procurement non-compliance, and slow remediation of previously identified audit findings. These findings often reappear across multiple reporting periods, indicating systemic issues rather than isolated control failures. For Audit and Risk Committees, this context is critical. Assurance should not focus solely on whether policies and frameworks exist, but on whether they are consistently operating in practice. The persistence of similar findings across agencies and years demonstrates that without strong leadership oversight, effective capability and rigorous follow-up, control environments can deteriorate even in highly regulated public sector settings. Leadership and organisational culture have the potential to adversely impact control and compliance within agencies. Where accountability and internal controls, legal compliance and risk management is unclear or weakly enforced, issues are more likely to recur. Our reports note repeat findings which suggest that while issues may be acknowledged, they are not always owned or resolved in a sustained manner. A compliance-focused culture can emerge where controls are treated as administrative tasks rather than critical safeguards. This is often evidenced by a lack of understanding of why control processes exist. This is particularly the case where you have new staff coming in who just do processes because they've always been done that way. Common examples might include invoice sign-offs, where people don't understand what it is they're actually signing off on an invoice, and dare I say, bona fides. In such environments, remediation efforts may be superficial and executives may not be held accountable for persistent weaknesses. For Audit and Risk Committees, this underscores the importance of challenging management on ownership. Who is responsible for each significant control or risk, and how is performance being monitored? Effective oversight requires probing beyond assurances to understand whether executives actively promote ethical behaviour, compliance and risk awareness, and whether consequences exist for failure to remediate known issues. Strong tone at the top, supported by clear accountability mechanisms, is essential, in my view, to prevent control breakdowns from becoming entrenched. IT control weaknesses represent one of the most persistent and significant areas highlighted in our audits, and dare I say, one of the most worrying. Common issues include excessive or inappropriate user access, weak privilege control or privilege access controls, inadequate change management, and insufficient system monitoring and logging. These weaknesses are particularly concerning given the increasing reliance on complex enterprise systems and the ongoing implementation of major platforms such as the new Oracle financial system. System transitions, like our new financial system, introduce heightened risk as new processes, roles and configurations can inadvertently weaken established controls. Our reports and management letters frequently highlight that access reviews are not performed regularly or thoroughly, and that changes to systems are not always appropriately approved or tested. It's my view that IT risk should be a standing agenda item for all audit and risk committees, with a focus on independent assurance over access management, change controls and system implementations. Chairs should seek confidence that IT controls are not only designed appropriately, but are actively operating and adapting to change, particularly during periods of reform or digital transformation. Particularly as we embark on significant financial systems reform, it is important to ask, what has this change done to our control environment? Is it still working effectively? Weaknesses in fundamental financial controls continue to feature prominently in our audit findings. Issues such as late or unreconciled accounts, inadequate review of journals, poor segregation of duties and reliance on manual spreadsheets undermine the integrity of financial reporting and increase the risk of error or misstatement. While these controls are generally understood and documented, audits often reveal that they are not performed consistently or that evidence of review is insufficient. Manual workarounds, often introduced to compensate for system limitations or resourcing constraints, further elevate risk. For audit and risk committees, it is important to focus on the operation of these controls in practice, including timeliness, quality of review, and resilience to staff turnover. Having a reconciliation that's done, well, having 12 months worth of reconciliations done in May is not doing reconciliations. Having them done every month is what introduces the control. The introduction of new financial systems will require review of control frameworks to identify gaps. Questions should be directed at understanding where manual processes exist, why they persist, or in some instances, why they've been created, and what plans are in place to strengthen automation and oversight. Strong financial controls remain a cornerstone of public sector accountability and require our sustained attention. The persistence of control and compliance issues in our agencies can be linked to weaknesses in monitoring, assurance and organisational capability. Our reports regularly highlight slow or incomplete remediation of audit findings, with some issues remaining unresolved for multiple years. Capability constraints in finance, IT and risk functions combined with high staff turnover can erode control effectiveness and continuity. In this context, our audit and risk committees play a critical role in driving improvement. It is my view that chairs should prioritise monitoring of repeat findings, ensure that remediation actions are clearly owned and time-bound, and seek assurance that underlying root causes are addressed rather than just the symptoms. Particular attention should be given to high-risk areas such as IT controls and system transitions. Effective ARC oversight requires a focus on evidence, challenge of actions, and sustained follow-up to ensure that control, compliance and risk management frameworks operate effectively in practice. With the factors identified earlier impacting controls, compliance and risk management, ultimately I think it's about asking, what evidence do I have that controls and risk management are operating effectively, not just that they are documented? Hopefully that can help you guys as you head into this end of year process, or your end of year process, but also in working through some of the challenges which I see coming and which I outlined at the beginning. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Matt Moffat, who's going to talk to us about financial reform program update. And it's probably worth casting the lens that I just pitched as you consider the enormous project that Matt's looking after and the challenges which I know the team are doing a great job of managing. But there will be challenges and there will be flow-on effects for controls in all agencies that are embracing this reform. So as a bit of background, Matt is the Director of the Financial Reform Program. He's leading major initiatives to modernise financial management across the state. He's held senior roles in business systems, payroll services and finance, and so really brings the necessary skills and background and understanding to lead what is, I think, such a critical program. Certainly from my background, introducing Masterpiece many years ago, I feel for him. It's a massive task he's undertaking, and I guess, given it was a long time ago, I was involved in introducing Masterpiece, long overdue as well. So I won't talk anymore. I'll hand you across to Matt and thank him for taking time out of what is an incredibly busy schedule to present to us this morning. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Andrew. And look, I'll hopefully be able to address some of the things that we're sort of having as focus as part of our agenda. But Andrew's absolutely right. Something as complex as this, we will introduce new risk, we will introduce new issues. I think from what I'm seeing, we'll solve quite a few issues. But let me touch on a few things and see how we go. So again, thanks, Andrew. We're really trying to break the model a little bit with the finance reform program, where, from my own learnings from sort of scars past, is to make sure that we engage the right expertise early. So we've got our CIOs on the ICT steering committee, we've got our business CFO steering committee, and then we've really tried to engage the audit team much earlier than, I guess, from my experience, we have done in the past. So again, really trying to give them a say as we sort of build and design the solution and help allow them to sort of come on the journey with us and I guess highlight issues as soon as possible to allow us to sort of react and deal with things as we go. So I guess that's sort of a key sort of aspect or change from my learnings that we're trying to do. Look, the first question, I guess, is what is the finance reform program? I mean, there's some very well-connected people here, so I'm sure you've heard of it before. But one reason you might not have heard of it before is we were called the Masterpiece Replacement Project originally. As Andrew alluded, I think in my time in shared services, we've had 4 attempts at getting funding to replace Masterpiece, which is a 30-year-old green screen system, as we all probably know. But what we really sort of identified early is that this was a once in a lifetime or once in a career, for me, hopefully once in a lifetime career opportunity to replace the finance system. And reform the way we do finances in the state. You sort of don't get these opportunities easily. So we're replacing Masterpiece with Oracle, and it's for those that might know Oracle Health, SA Health are already on Oracle. We're going with the cloud version. So I think that's something that SA Health are also looking to do as well. We're working closely with them to just keep them in line with what we're doing in our approach and any learnings that we've got to help them in their future endeavours as well. So I guess some of the things that Andrew alluded to, that we've introduced over 30 years with Masterpiece is a lot of workarounds, right? Like Masterpiece hasn't been upgraded for 20 years. You get the patches. It's on the mainframe. We call it the grand old lady. Like it's not broken. It's sort of does its thing. It just doesn't. It's not going to take us to that next level. And so that's sort of how we went with our business case to get the final funding. It was a risk-based approach as well. The vendor was starting to use language like coming out of support. We can't support this thing anymore. So that was another real help for reaction, but again, we got some good funding to sort of take that forward. Andrew alluded to a lot of legacy systems as well. We're replacing quite a few, as you can imagine, not all, but quite a few through this process. So again, hopefully we can get rid of a lot of technical debt that we've accrued over the 30 years as well. All right. Well, other way. All right. So these sort of key decisions underpin, our sort of whole program and what we're sort of trying to do. So the first one there was around the thin GL, and so what we're really trying to do here is, as you can imagine, we've got quite a bit of inconsistency across the state because everyone has their own individual masterpiece environments. So separation or independence has been sort of facilitated. With the move to Oracle, we're going to one ledger, one chart, one GL. Like, it's all a consistent approach. So it's a big change, as Andrew alluded to, and a huge change management and reform piece as part of it. And I'll talk about one of my mandates a little bit later in our objectives, which is sort of ringing true and allowing us to sort of stick to this model. But the key thing with the general ledger and the principle there to enable a thin general ledger, which hopefully you've heard of that before, but it is sort of a best practice principle about having a thin GL and leveraging your sub ledgers to do that sort of more granular reporting and underpin all of that. And I guess your AP, your payroll, your projects, which we'll talk about in a sec, are all these key sub ledgers that we're looking to leverage with the new solution. And so, the next one is the chart of accounts. And so we've got, I think, over 26 different chart of accounts. We've got unbelievably unsupported tools in shared services that are mapping these chart of accounts to the BMS whole of government chart of accounts. Again, hoping to get rid of all those tools. And so we've largely agreed with everyone that a standard chart of accounts. Not largely, we have agreed a standard chart of accounts, and so we're sticking to that. As you can imagine, there's little things that are coming out with each of our go lives, but we're so far haven't had to break that rule. So the thing with the thin GL and the chart of accounts is where there is no flexibility. These are the rules. These are what we're applying. We're not really budging on those principles so far. So that's sort of where it's key. Where the flex comes in is the next two, where we have projects and then next to it on reporting. So projects, we've got about 5 agencies that use similar functionality in a masterpiece called Job Cost. It's very sort of similar concept. So I think Department of Transport, Housing, Child Protection, to name a few, leverage it currently. So projects is not really new to them, but to everyone else, which is the other 48 agencies, it's like starting again. It's quite different, and so that's where I guess the nervousness and the complexity is coming from a lot of feedback, and we're sort of trying to dedicate a lot of time to that to help agencies. But effectively, a project, sometimes in your current chart and masterpiece, you might have an activity or a project type segment in your chart, and that's what goes and that's what moves, I guess, effectively to projects in a nutshell in most cases. And with projects, agencies can create, and you can have almost a project plan effectively. It's not really designed to be a project plan, but you can have quite a detailed work breakdown structure that really allows for more granularity to get that key reporting. And as I said, it's where we're allowing agencies to flex and leverage it to deal with their sort of idiosyncrasies about how they manage their business, as we all have those. And then the last one is reporting. I mean, in Masterpiece, we have no reporting. Agencies have had to stand up their own warehouses, and there's as many warehouses as there are agencies. And so, again, we're hopeful that the reporting capability in Oracle, where we've got 2 to 3 reporting tools, particularly their flagship product, which is called Fusion Data Analytics, FDI, you might hear that acronym. And that's sort of where the future lies, where we're getting huge flexibility and capability about creating reports, but we're really only scratching the surface, as you can imagine. We've got to mature as a team to be able to educate, and as a government, and teach people how to really get the best out of those tools. Okay, so yeah, these are the key program objectives that we've really sort of had from the start. And there's one that right in the middle that I really latch onto, but I'll talk to them all as from left to right. The first one there is just about implementing a contemporary fit-for-purpose solution on time and within budget. On time and is always the challenge, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide as to where we're going. But largely, we're still, we're about to go live with our third group. We've got 7 in total on the 1st of July, so we're largely sticking to it. But there is always time pressures and complexities and risk with something, getting 52 agencies across onto a new platform. The second sort of pillar there was really around establish a technical architecture in line with, the security framework. And so again, we've really tried to leverage the expertise of the audit team. We've got an independent audit starting on the 22nd of June. Now that we've got a platform up, I should have said earlier, we do have KPMG and DXC as our implementation support partners. So they've been with us since September 24. And really sort of helped us through, the whole process, the learning. A big part of our strategy has been about, knowledge transfer. We want to make sure some of my learnings from other programs is we get to the end of the program and the business is not ready to take over what we've built and what we've, created. And so the reform team just sort of seems to drag on and live for much longer than we really would like. Another little hopefully learning, and I'll tell you at the end whether it works, is to try and have this really strong knowledge base, knowledge transfer aspect to the contract with KPMG to basically teach us, and I'll talk a little bit about the deploy strategy on the next slide. My favourite, and I think my lifesaver at the moment, is adopt, not adapt. So I can't recommend it strongly enough with any cloud solution that you're implementing is to use this adopt, not adapt principle, which is, the word customization in these cloud applications. If I say that to Oracle, they laugh at me like, we don't customize, Matt. Don't bother asking me. So that means we have to adopt their functionality and adapt our processes to that solution, to their best practice solution. So our logic is that they're, paying the thousands of agencies and companies across the world are leveraging Oracle, so they can't be doing everything wrong. So we should be able to largely adopt their best practices and solution and make our sort of processes work with that. And again, huge change management, huge training, huge risk, but we're trying to sort of undo, I guess, to a degree, 30 years of workarounds and practices that we need to rethink, which does, as Andrew said, add a lot of risk. The next one there is just implement a support model. So, we've got, as I said, we haven't done an upgrade for Masterpiece forever, so we're living with what we've got for nearly 20 years. So it's really not something that we can continue to sustain and still be that world-class treasury, that world-class finance that we would love to have across the state. We've also spend a lot of money, as you can imagine, on machinery of government changes, and I get that they have to happen, but the industry in shared services and agencies is phenomenal in this space. So we're really trying to make some decisions on the solution, and Oracle was one of the few solutions that was allowing us to do simple things like move a cost centre from one agency to the other, as opposed to starting again, which is basically what we do now in Masterpiece. And the flow on to all the systems, as you can imagine, is significant, and is what really creates a lot of complexity for changes in that space. And the last one there, which is really where I was going with the sort of knowledge transfer piece earlier, is that we need to have a model where we can support Masterpiece, because the program, as you'll see on the next slide, is sort of an 18 to 2 year process to get everyone over. So we're going to be supporting 2 systems, 2 processes, everything as much as for that whole period. So we really had to come up with a model where we're leveraging, I guess you could call it a managed services type model, but slightly different, where they're not doing it for us, they're doing it with us. So we've increased DXC and KPMG resources in our shared services business system team to, again, they're physically located with the team and they actually do that sort of natural KT and help build our capability as we go, and then also allow the team resources we've currently got in shared services to have extra people to support multiple systems. Okay, so our journey so far. So we went live on the 1st of December with Department of Correctional Services. So they were our pilot. Sarah Taylor and the team, I can't thank them enough. They were very patient with us. There was plenty of scars, as you can imagine, but with a pilot. But some really great learnings. And I think if I had my time again, I would have had probably about a 6-month hiatus between Group 2, I think, and 3, just to introduce the learnings to allow us to sort of get in that more repeatable model for the future groups, because as you can see, we're doing effectively one close to every quarter to get the whole 52 agencies over. So we went live with DTF and Defence SA on the 1st of April this year. We just came out of hypercare yesterday, so that's looking okay and pretty stable. Don't get me wrong, there are still issues not bespoke to DTF or DCS. Reporting is definitely the area of focus at the moment. I think we're just a lack of maturity there, as I said earlier, that we just need to keep building on to sort of create that capability across the state. And then we originally had Group 4 there, which is Department of Environment, Public Trustee, Emergency Services and History Trust. They were originally 1st of September, so just recently at the last board we moved them out by 3 months again to do what I just said about giving us a little bit of a window to introduce some of the learnings and get some of our materials up to date such that we can get in that more rinse and repeat model. And I guess the biggest feedback we've been getting from agencies is a timeliness of response or getting engagement early. So again, a lot of those learnings are designed to try and help with that as well. And so then we've got Group 5, 1st of April next year, SAPOL and the PIRSA and AGD and Arts on the 1st of July next year. I'm guarantee we'll get some learnings with 1st of July this year. There's some good and bad things with the 1st of July. 1st of July is quite clean, as you can imagine, with end of year statements and reporting. But it does create other complexities where we can't finish our data migration until about September for Group 3, so there's a long tail on it, and so there's just some learnings there that we'll get out of this Group 3 going live on 1st of July as well. Our original end date for the whole program was 1st of September, so we're not bad. We've got a month delay there. I think in reality learnings out of Group 3 this year for 1st of July. I've got a feeling that 1 October might slip to 1 November, but it's early days yet. We just thought we'd make that call next year, just before early next year, once we get the learnings out of this year. So I guess some of the key sort of timelines and engagement with agencies, it's about an 8th month out from go live sort of cycle where we start to meet a bit more regularly, start to share what we call homework packs. We're all going back to school, so it's sort of it's a model where we're trying to use these packs to flesh out thought, discussion, decisions, key decisions, impacts, to sort of really highlight early as possible what we need to consider. And they're the maturity that we want to do in these next 6 months. We're uplifting those packs, if you like, of information that will really sort of help agencies, get early decisions and be able to, understand what they're approving as well, which is the other sort of key thing. And I guess some of the other key sign-offs that you'd be sort of interested in, given your profession, is just to we have about 2 months out, we move into a very detailed cutover plan, which is in some cases to the hour of activities. We meet with people. For Group 2, we had about nearly 100 people meeting every day, so there's a lot of moving parts. Following up, making sure everyone does their bit. If they don't do that, the impact here, and so it's quite a sophisticated sort of cutover plan. and a very complex one, and I guess, it can have huge impact if we don't have everyone doing their little part in it. So, we sort of spend a lot of time with that. We do data migration 3 times, and I'll go into what we actually migrate and not migrate, because you'll probably be interested in that as well. But we do a data migration for our, what we call integration testing, which is really just, the integrations. It's not really end-to-end functional at that point. We then do another data migration when we move into user acceptance testing, and that's generally about 2 months out. So we're in UAT for Group 3 right now. And that is effectively a replication of what we're doing in prod, as close to it as possible. There's obviously a few exceptions, but the key is to do it as close as we can to what we're going to do in prod, and that's our test. And the agency effectively signs off on what we migrate, the balances, all that sort of stuff, and that's their first look, I guess, at what they'll be expected to do for prod. And then obviously we do the data migration for prod, and there's obviously key sign-offs for all that. We've got our pre-go live reports, we've got our hypercare reports, we've got our UAT exit reports, all those sort of key sign-offs. The agencies have RSI by the time they've finished signing off everything that we sort of do. But again, it's really quite important that sort of everyone understands what they're getting through that process. So the next slide here is just really around sort of where we're at, some of the significant milestones. I've probably touched on a few of them, but we sort of came out of construct officially in 1st of December. In that construct phase, which was before we sort of went live with the pilot, or that was sort of the last sort of phase of it, we spent a lot of time working through key design decisions. There was about 38 key design decisions, and they were decisions that if we got wrong, it was like start again type sort of stuff. So it was important that we got those decisions, signed off early. The best example I can give you is the chart of accounts that I was talking about earlier. Like, that was a key design decision. If we had to add a segment in Oracle, as an example, like if we decided that ThinGL wasn't going to work and we had to bring activity back in, it's like start again type sort of structure with the way Oracle works. So I will say though, just for your ears only, we've got a spare segment that's largely hidden just in case we get it out, so we don't have to start again. So that was one of our learnings early on. So as you can imagine, we've got, we had 25 agencies come in before we went live and spend 5 weeks with us testing. So the whole model was really designed about identifying whole of government issues before we went live with anything. And another real sort of saver, I think, we're getting lots of defects, as you can imagine, but they're manageable, and so it was all about trying to keep the defects to the complexity where we could manage them between each go live, as opposed to at the start we had quite a bit of extra time to sort of deal with those complexities. So again, front end, a lot of our testing and engagement have agencies all represented, and that was a really sort of another key sort of decision, I think, that's sort of saving us at the moment in our approach to construct and validate. As I mentioned, we exited hypercare for DCS, we exited hypercare for DTF just last week. DCS, we extended that, almost doubled it over Christmas. We did 2 pay periods, what we call month-end closures with them, things like that. Hey, Libby. We did 2 month-end closes with the agencies, because that was really a big change. Agencies were very inconsistent in their period close. Some are 15-day close, some are 1-day close. We landed at 2. I think it's going to end up at 3, just through some learnings, I think. But we're looking at some AI capability as well in this space to help with, streamlining the close. But I think we got to walk first, so I think there's a little bit to play out there. Reporting sandpit, another real game changer, and as I said, I think if I had my time again, I would have introduced that concept a lot earlier. Agencies really needed a play to look at reports. It's the unknown, they don't have now, or they've got their own bespoke sort of tools and reports, so they really need to make sure that they have sort of line of sight of that. So again, it was another real sort of key area that sort of helped us, get that early visibility for agencies on what reporting capability there is, and whether they think they still need to sustain or maintain a new data warehouse reporting tool. At the moment, most of the first few groups have sort of stood up a reporting warehouse, which is not ideal, not what I was hoping, but I'm hoping some of these strategies and that early line of sight might sort of change that in the future, because if we all have to have our own independent warehousing, then it sort of devalues the whole Oracle reporting tools that we've got in place. The last couple there, we had some really good success with training. It's not perfect. I think reporting is an area that we're going to sort of need to do a bit of uplift there and really sort of help people. The reporting model is a self-service reporting model, so we're really trying to teach people how to do their own reports, run their own reports, deliver reports in platform. As you guys know, as soon as you bring that data out of platform, there creates other sort of security complexities and issues. So we're trying to really, keep as much as we can of data sharing within platform. And again, the Oracle licensing is, every public servant could have a user license, so we're not restricted in any way there. And then again, the last pillar there is just some key decisions that we're progressing, which is really around special deposit accounts, which was, not specific to correctional, definitely a big thing for DTF, and so we're sort of learning some good things out of that one. Got a key meeting today on that one to hopefully finalise. Grants management, we're really trying to standardise how agencies manage grants. That's grants out. Again, very bespoke, very different. Some agencies don't care because they're not doing grants, but then there's others that really have a vested interest in it. So we're just sort of trying to get the balance right there of how we do grants management. And then end of financial year and end of month is the two big ones at the moment. So there was a big session with the Auditor General and Auditor guys and DCS yesterday showing the new solution for financial statements for correctional services. I haven't touched base yet to see how that went, but hopefully it went all right. DTF's the next one, but we're trying to leverage Oracle's what they call narrative reporting solution for doing financial statements moving forward. So if that all goes to plan, that'll be quite a powerful solution. Again, we get rid of we call it the KPMG end of year tool. It's a glorified sort of macro spreadsheet. It'd be great to have a supported model and solution for the state as well in that space. I'll be pretty brief on this one, but I just wanted to share with you our governance. I sort of touched on it a little bit. We've got our board chaired by Tammy, the Under Treasurer, and have the audit team, Dan, on that now as well. We have Scott Bayliss and Fung Chow and Mark Carey, who have been awesome support for me, all represented. Fung and Scott Bayliss chairs the technical steering committee with all the CIOs, and again, that was another hopefully sort of slightly different approach and something that we were trying to sort of introduce, where we get the CIOs engaged much earlier. Often they sort of get sort of, we're going live tomorrow, guys, you ready? And so we're trying to get them engaged much earlier. So hopefully that helps with their sort of planning as well. And then Fung chairs the business steering committee. We've got design authority groups, shared services steering committees. Obviously shared services is probably, we've got pretty much nearly 200 FTE that are impacted by this directly. So it's probably one of the bigger groups, and they get impacted every go live, as opposed to an agency just sort of once a quarter, or sort of once in their sort of period. The deployment group, stakeholder groups, and then a joint steering committee is the fine print down the bottom there, where we manage the contract and all those sort of key activities as well. And my last two slides, so this data migration, I just thought I'd share a little bit here because this might be of some interest. We've had to make some decisions, as you can imagine, by going from 26 chart of accounts to one. We really couldn't migrate everything. Well, we could try, but it was recommended strongly that we don't try. So we are only migrating balances and budgets for the financial year that agencies go live in. So as I said, for 1st of July, that's quite clean. We don't really migrate much, but for Group 3, we're migrating the previous financial year, so they can do that comparative type reporting from last year to the financial year next year. But for DTF and DCS, we migrated all their monthly balances for each month, so that they can do their financial statements out of Oracle and then only really have to leverage the historical data for that detailed analysis and transactional information. So all the Masterpiece transactional information will be put in the Oracle Cloud, so we'll retain it and leverage the FDI reporting tool. So the idea is we'll teach people how to use the FDI reporting tool for production, but they'll also be able to leverage it for historical Masterpiece data that we migrate. And we also bring in a little bit of CRIS 21 payroll and for education value data, so we bring that in as well. There is a fair bit of tidy up happening, so as Andrew alluded to, there's some quality issues that we've definitely found, and we've been reporting those to agencies since November 23, with vendors that are things with outstanding creditors and debtors. For some agencies they go back quite a ways. Our preference is to obviously not set up financial years going back to the 1990s if we can, and so we've really tried to get agencies to tidy that up and get that right, and largely that's been done, so I think that'll be a really good outcome at the end as well for most agencies. So that's that one. And the last slide I've got here really is just around integration strategy and summary, and so this was another one that we always needed an integration solution for what we were doing. We've got 140 systems that interface with Masterpiece that we obviously had to interface with Oracle. It equates to about 1,000 integrations a day, so it's quite, when we get to the end, that's sort of quite a bit of traffic, as you can imagine, and complexity. So our strategy here was to really minimise change on feeder systems. So, some of our learnings from other government jurisdictions and SA Health as well, where, we, Shared Service DTF, don't own these 140 integrating systems, so that we're reliant on agencies to modify those, and some of those are unsupported as well, and very old, just as old as Masterpiece in many instances. So our strategy was to minimise change to those systems. So the idea is they continue to give us the Masterpiece output file, and we use we signed up with Salesforce MuleSoft solution to transform that file into what Oracle needs. So we update cost centres, we update counts, tax codes, things of that in the source system, but the actual output that comes out of those systems is as it was for Masterpiece. There is some exceptions to that, but generally that agencies have been sort of sticking to that model. So I guess a good outcome from this is that we didn't intend initially to have a whole of government iPaaS or integration solution. The iPaaS or MuleSoft that we signed up with Salesforce ended up being a whole of government platform, and so obviously we're leveraging a lot. Child Protection are doing some great stuff there. Education are already much more mature than us and doing a lot of great work there on the platform. SA Water and AGD that are starting to get in SAPOL. So there's just getting some good momentum. The whole idea of that contract was the more you use it, the more benefits or cheaper for the state. So again, it's one of those models that we need everyone to buy in to really get that value for the state. But that was another really, not initially intended, but a really good outcome for the state once we get mature in that space and leverage that integration solution. So effectively, sort of you can see on that diagram, the iPaaS or the MuleSoft platform is the gatekeeper for everything in and out of Oracle, and that's sort of how we manage the multi-agency environment and some of that complexity that goes along with that. So that really brought it into my presentation. I don't know if there's any questions or whether this is the right forum to do that, but I'm happy to take any questions if I provoked any. Cool, thank you. Yeah.
The adopt and adapt. Are people getting better at that? Because pretty much everything's by now. You just have to fit in.
Yeah.
But for committees, are there any particular risks we ought to be listening out for from our agencies from the adopt strategy?
Yeah. So look, every time I mention the word adopt, not adapt in the governance groups, I get the eye roll, because it's just, Matt, shut up, say it again. But it is an important principle. So, yes, we are maturing, I think, a bit, but the adopt, not adapt principle means huge change management, which does create its own risk on its own, and people understanding the new process. Training has been a big thing. So I think for Group 3, which is DHS, Housing and DSD, we're training about 400 people. So it's a big sort of change management piece. So if I'm honest with you, this is the first one that I've done where we've gone with this model and adopt, not adapt, but I'm confident it's definitely saved me so many times already in sort of key principles, in complexities, in being able to make certain assumptions as well that, that's standard across everyone. I do get the eye roll, but we'll mature in that space, I reckon. But yeah, just change and process controls, which going to get audited over the next sort of couple of weeks and months. So I think, there will be some findings. I'm not naive to think that we won't have some gaps. I hope we filled a lot, but I think we'll have some new ones that we'll just need to work through. Les?
Just following on from that question, what sort of feedback are you getting from agencies in terms of them changing their business processes? Because the adopt versus adapt is really, how the system will do stuff, but how do I move this from here, and how are the processes that I use now going to change? You're talking about change management. What sort of feedback are you getting from agencies?
Yeah, I think we have changed our approach to really spend a lot more time highlighting this, because it does create, like I said, a lot more change management and a lot more impact. Generally, though, I feel like they can see that it's time, right? Like, I feel like part of me thinks that if we did this program maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that I don't think we were ready, because Masterpiece was working. Like, everyone, it is stable, it's pretty robust. But when I did the Chris 5 to Chris 21 program, way back, there was a lot of convincing people that we needed to do this project, whereas I've never had to do that yet. I've never had to spend any time convincing people why we are doing this. It's why haven't you done this is more the thing, and we're sort of getting a lot more challenge from agencies now that they're learning and getting their own capability of it, of what they can do more and how they can grow more and get the best out of it. So don't get me wrong, I think there's a phase 2 of this program. I think we've got to mature a little bit, but we're already talking about what do you call it, budgeting and forecasting and planning. Like, that's not in scope. It was something we really stood firm on, but there's a business case I'm already seeing it following. I'm just trying to keep it to the end. We have to do it for SAPOL because they're on Oracle planning as a solution, so we have to do something for them, but they'll be our pilot for that.
Obviously, massive system changes like this pose their own problems, internal problems. But my experience is sometimes that the unexpected difficulties lead actually to really significant improvement in the methods that you employ in delivering. Have you had any major unexpected challenges that you've now been able to overcome and build into your reform process?
Yes. There's so this sort of 6-month hiatus after Group 3 is really designed to try and introduce some of those things. So I think if I had my time again, we would have had that 6 month. We would be in that 6-month period now. The learnings we got from pilot were not enough, I think, but out of Group 2 we got a lot more, which allowed us to sort of, if we had that, we would have had a good 6 months worth of uplift. Introducing better packs and information for agencies, better materials. I think some of the opportunities that it's created is just really, challenging the status quo. Like, we get in that cycle, and I think Andrew said it earlier, where you just do it, do it because you've always done it. Like, there's a little bit coming out where people go, we ask people, well, why do you do that? And I said, because the piece of paper says I should. And that, they don't really know why. And so we're trying to really challenge that. And I guess that's where I guess we do come across some challenges and pushback, because we are sort of, saying the way you've been doing it for 30 years is sort of not the best practice anymore. And we're sort of trying to use and demonstrate in the solution how that can fix their problem and make their life easier. But again, it's a bit of a sell piece, and so, one of the big things I do when we're interviewing people that are coming into the team is to, try and draw out their sort of influence and negotiation skills, because a lot of it is about trying to sell the solution and help them come on the journey. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but that was some of the stuff that we've tried to work through.
Thanks, Matt. I just had a question on how quickly this is progressing, and obviously the advancement of technology and AI. Are we adapting our processes along the way, and as you bring in new agencies, are we then going back and having a look at? So it's just that change piece. It's not just changing processes, but it's also the changing advancement of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just saying to Dan earlier that the documentation and the procedures are going to be something that they're going to find that's not fully complete and fleshed out, because we're sort of still getting some good learnings from Group 2. So by the end before we go live with Group 4, we'll have a lot better collateral on documentation to help users. With Oracle, we have leveraged what we call Oracle Guided Learning, which is an online tool where you do the task in production effectively, and by the time you get to the end of the course or the activity, you've actually completed it. So like you say, how do I process a journal? And it'll step you through doing a journal and teach the user. So I don't know, there's always different ways of people learning, and I like that because I hate training, but I like being productive, and so I sort of get the balance right for me personally, so that's a good one. We've got an issue with remittance, miscellaneous receipts, and the functionality in Oracle not being exactly as we planned, so we're spending some time with Oracle, who they're leaning in, as well as KPMG, to leverage AI, so we're looking at that. So that's going to be our first real, I guess, toeing the thing on AI and Oracle's AI solution, so I'm dying to see how that sort of plays out to automate that receipting, because you can imagine there's a lot of that with some agencies. Sorry guys, I've gone way over time.
All right. I'd just like to thank Matt once again for his time this morning. It is a very, very large change that he is leading at the moment, and there's a lot of things going on, so thank you again, Matt.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate
Cheers.
it.
So I wanted to talk to you this morning just around, firstly, just around some outcomes from the work that we've done, or reported, I guess. So the first thing, we've had about a report early May, about 100 agencies from 24-25. Now, that's a little later than we would normally do that, but we were interrupted by a state election. Parliament doesn't sit. So it got tabled early in May. So I thought it might be worth just touching on a couple of the key themes that came out of that report. Not going through them all. Andrew's already talked this morning about some of the sort of the common recurring things that come up from our work, but I thought it might just be worth touching on a couple that, for various reasons, sort of follow that theme. The first is around cash. Now, controls over cash are pretty well understood. They're pretty basic. They're things that most accountants understand, need to happen regularly. So things like having a bank reconciliation, as Andrew said, you don't want a bank reconciliation that doesn't happen regularly. There's a whole range of reasons for that. That is still something we find disturbingly often that happens across agencies, and it's not something that you would want to see in a reasonably well-structured and mature control environment. So bank reconciliation is pretty basic, but it is something that keeps coming up. The other area of cash management that is perhaps less well understood, a lot of the agencies that you might be on audit committees for have what are called either deposit accounts or special deposit accounts under the Public Finance and Audit Act. As soon as you have one of those accounts, there's some other specific requirements that kick in under the Public Finance and Audit Act and the Treasurer's instructions. So things like they can't become overdrawn. If they do, it's a breach of the Treasurer's instruction. And yet, what we have found in the last, I'd say probably 2 or 3 years, is there are a number that have had that happen, some of them for an extended period of time. So if you have a combination of things like this happening with cash management, I guess it gets back to the point that Andrew made earlier. What is the underlying control environment in that agency looking like if you're starting to see some of these basic things not happening in the way that you would expect? So it's worth just probably reflecting on whether there are issues coming out of whether it's internal audit work, our work, or other things that you're seeing in your agency that starts to ask those questions. Governance was the other area I wanted to just quickly touch on. So governance is a very broad topic, but things that you would expect, like compliance with legal requirements around getting budgets approved for some statutory agencies, making sure that you have records of your meetings, that you have minutes of your meetings, you have minutes that record who was there and who made or approved a decision. These are things that are, again, they're fairly basic. They're things that you would expect in a relatively mature environment, but they're not always there. So they're just some pointers when you, in the context of what Andrew was talking about earlier, some of those challenges that agencies already have or may have more of in the future. Things to think about from an audit committee perspective. What are you seeing in those areas, and are you getting some positive confirmation that things are working in the way that you would expect them to? The other thing, just to quickly mention, we have finished a bunch of work around the university sector and some other agencies that have different financial reporting timeframes. So we had 4 universities for this year. That number obviously starts to change in the future. But that work has all been completed. You'll see that coming out in a report in June, later in June, once the annual reports have all been signed and in the uni cases tabled. I thought it might also be worth just touching on a few things work that we're currently working through. So valuations. Now, for those of you who've been to these before, I've talked about valuations in the past. It's an ongoing theme. Valuations tend to be complex areas for agencies to work through. If they're doing a revaluation of all of their assets, there's a lot of work involved in that. It tends to be a manual process, so the earlier that can happen, the better. Now, there are a number of agencies who have regular, well-established processes that work well. There are some that are maybe a little bit less mature in how they tackle their valuation processes. Probably one of the things to think about from a committee perspective for yourselves would be to understand what valuations are happening and the timing of them. So it's probably worth tackling, both Andrew and a little bit, and Matt in his presentation talked about some of the challenging assumptions. So there is a long-standing myth that auditors require a valuation at 30 June. Now that's true for some things, investments or liquid assets. It's not true for your property, plant and equipment. You don't have to do your valuation at 30 June. You can do it earlier and you can make sure that there hasn't been a significant change, something that we've encouraged agencies to do. But there are some who still wait until about April, appoint some valuers and then get a 30 June valuation, which means that it's happening in the midst of the busiest period for their finance team and for the audit team. So anything that we can do to avoid that would be brilliant. The other one that comes up, and this isn't common, but it generally involves some fairly large numbers. Agencies in government transfer assets between each other every now and then. Now, in the private sector, this wouldn't be a problem because it would happen, cash would change hands, you'd know when the transactions actually happen. In government, what tends to happen sometimes is those transactions are talked about conceptually for about 8 or 9 months. It gets to May, all of a sudden people start thinking about year end, and then they start doing the work to get them into the books properly. Anything, again, that you can check in with your agency around asset transfers and making sure that they're across and well sorted before the end of the year would be appreciated. The other one to briefly mention, we've had an election. There's a range of things that come out of that in terms of commitments the government has made. So there's support for private aged care providers building new accommodation, there's a diesel reserve, there's some future gas reservation things. These are all big, relatively big transactions. Some of them will impact financial statements this year, some won't. But making sure if your agency is involved in that, they are putting something to you about what the impact is. That should already probably have happened. We're at the end of May. You would hope that they would be doing that now. But it's just something to think about and work through if you haven't seen anything already. Now, Matt has given us a really good presentation on finance reform. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it is worth just highlighting a couple of points. So Matt talked about DTF transitioning across. DTF is not just Treasury and Finance, that is also a bunch of other attached agencies associated with DTF. So there's about seven or eight reporting entities, things like CTP Regulator, ASCOSA. There's a range that are attached to DTF that are already impacted by that. So there's been some discussion, some of your questions already. Agency readiness is critical to the success of this process. It is a massive change management piece, so making sure that the agencies are all working through what does it mean in terms of change to their process is one of the things that is key to being well prepared. I've got a question there about what might change in your financial statements. That comes back to a common chart of accounts and a common reporting solution. So working your way through that and making sure you're comfortable with what that looks like for statements early in the process will be important. So yeah, it is a big change process. It is something that will impact the vast majority of agencies. If you're involved in the health sort of sector, it will likely impact them once the other agencies are finished, because the current version of Oracle that Health is using will be out of support at that point. So I won't spend any more time talking about that this morning. I will just quickly go through a couple of things coming up to year end. So, start with good news. There is no significant change to financial reporting requirements this year, so there's nothing new that agencies need to get used to, unless they have transitioned to Oracle, in which case they do need to work through their new reporting outcomes. And to address Matt's point before, for anyone from corrections who's here, yes, we were quite happy with the way that the financial reporting tool will work for Oracle. So there is a requirement around an annual reassessment of asset values, just making sure that agencies work through that requirement as they usually do. There is another myth to just talk about here. Agencies will often come to us and say, well, what's your version of materiality? Because we need to know whether this is material or not. Now, we have a materiality for every agency we audit. Equally, every agency that prepares a set of statements should have their own view about what's material in their statements that informs their decisions first. It's just one of those things that people say, well, you set materiality. Yes, we do, for our audit, but not for the preparation of the statements. So something to ask your CFOs if they're presenting to you with a set of financial statements is what they view as being material. And I've already mentioned if there are any new requirements coming out of the recent election. The other point I would make, cooperation is key to the year-end process. Works really well for most agencies. We've got very well established relationships. There's always a couple of things that come up that challenge that, but it is, by and large, it works very well. But it is key to making sure that we can all get through a very tight and busy part of the year well. Going, I guess, beyond this year end, so there are a couple of new standards coming in. There's one around insurance, which impacts about 5 agencies in South Australian Government. That comes in next year for those agencies. They're all pretty well on top of what they need to do with that. AASB 18, which is the second standard up there, will impact agencies in the future. The timing varies. If you're a for-profit entity, it's earlier. If you're a not-for-profit, they're still working through exactly when that will impact and what that looks like. It is a standard that is mostly around presentation changes. In my personal view, it's answering a question very few people asked, but it is a standard that will come in nonetheless. So it's just something for your agencies to be aware of, and you'll probably start to hear a little bit about that over the next 12 months. That was all I wanted to go through this morning, unless anyone had any quick questions at this point. Otherwise, I will hand over to Sal Bianco to just run you through some of the work we've been doing for performance audits.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Today, I'll be covering a couple of areas. First, I'll talk about a report we tabled last week on managing food safety in council areas. And then I'll just give you a brief update on 2 reviews we're currently doing and just some basic points about that. So first off, managing food safety in council areas. Look, we tabled these two reports last week, and there was two reports. I mean, our focus was how food safety is managed in council areas, but there are joint responsibilities for local and state government in this area. And so, as you can see, to get proper coverage, we reviewed how the Department of Health and Wellbeing oversees and supports councils in managing food safety, and that's part A of our report, state government. And we had a separate report on how two local government entities, and that was the City of Tea Tree Gully and Eastern Health Authority, regulated food safety within their council area. So they are the enforcement agency for food safety. And look, food safety, why do we do the audit? Look, it is an important regulatory activity. Food safety is vital to protecting public health and wellbeing, and we think that strong regulatory systems and effective enforcement help to prevent illness, hospitalisations and deaths. And just to get some context about what food safety looks like, you know, those are some of the stats there. There's about 18,000 businesses, food businesses in South Australia, and the estimates are that foodborne illnesses cost the economy about $3 billion a year, and you get a whole range of things. The estimates for annual cases of food poisoning is 4.7. You know, there's a lot of hospitalisations and some deaths as well, unfortunately. The key areas we covered in this review were roles and responsibilities frameworks, collection and use of data, the governance arrangements, including risk management and auditing, and risk-based inspection audits, and provision of information and education. So what I'm going to do, just briefly cover three areas for state government, those three areas there. And part A was Department of Health and Wellbeing. That was the state government element of it. And we did conclude there that, Department of Health and Wellbeing had effective activities to oversee and support councils manage food safety. So some of the effective activities we identified was collection of data. So they do collect a range of data about councils' food safety activities through various means, such as annual surveys, food safety rating scheme reports, food safety auditors' reports, and general inquiries. They also do a range of education and guidance to councils through initiatives such as inspection and audit program templates and guidelines, provision of forums and training to environmental health officers. They also provide guidance materials and online information. And we also found that they had a sound assessment and approval process for qualified safety auditors, that they were required to do that, to make sure they were qualified, experienced and competent. What we also did, we had some observations for the state government side, and probably the one that stood out for us was that unlike other jurisdictions in Australia, South Australia doesn't have a centralised statewide system to record food business details, something like a registration and licensing system, for example. So business owners are only required to notify relevant enforcement agency, which is usually the councils, before beginning operations. And we think a centralised system would improve the ability of regulatory agencies to monitor and communicate with businesses. In our report, I won't run through it now, but we've outlined a range of benefits at page 12 of that report of what we think the centralised system will help with there. We also found that DHW collects a raft of useful data, and our suggested improvement here, our suggested improvement was for them to consider more comprehensive trend evaluation and benchmarking in that area. We thought data is mainly used to monitor councils, but we thought it could be used for a range of other things, given they got that central oversight, and they could report on that. And the third thing was reporting. So once again, there's some useful information in the annual report for DHW on the operation of the Food Act. We felt this could be extended to report on performance of councils against inspection requirements, for example, and enforcement activities. We thought there was some opportunity to do some further reporting on that. And finally, for the central system, we identified some challenges for food safety enforcement agencies. So they're on page 9 and 10 of our report, but so we've already talked about notifications by food businesses and the central system. Probably the one thing I would mention is there's some challenges there with environmental health officer shortages. So over the last, say, 6 or 7 years, there's been an increase in food businesses, compared to a relatively unchanged number of EHOs over the same period. So from our point of view, that's probably a key risk for the agency to manage, and I think that's something they've identified, and they've done some work with Flinders University on that to try and address that as well. So look, moving on to part B of our report, where we reviewed the regulatory activities of 2 local government enforcement agencies, City of Teacheri Gully and Environmental Health Authority. So Environmental Health Authority is a regional subsidiary established by 5 constituent councils. So that EHA provides the service, environmental health services, to 5 councils that they've established. So what I was going to do is just cover some effective practices and some key insights for all councils. So some of the effective practices we did see at the 2 entities we visited was they did have good risk-based food safety inspections. They were documented and recorded, and findings were reported and follow-up action was taken. Similarly, for complaints, they established good processes for complaints and prioritising complaints, and they conducted an investigation and resolved issues timely in that area. And finally, clear and accurate information and guidance are provided to support food businesses in understanding and meeting their food safety requirements. There's a fair bit of information and education provided. And then finally, there's some local government insights that we identified in our report at page 4. So I think if you want to just if you've got some regulatory activities in your entity that you want to get some sort of checklist on, that's probably not a bad place to start. The sort of things that we framed it as all councils should consider when reviewing their own practices. So I wasn't going to really go through those. It's just something I think you can refer to if you felt we wanted more information. That's more a good starting point from our point of view. So that was it on food safety. I was just going to cover just a couple of upcoming reports. And that's evidence that we don't just sit at our desk. That's down at Darlington. A group of performance and auditors in our department have gone out there to a site visit, which was really, really interesting. So look, the first one we looked at, we're currently conducting at the moment is the River Torrens to Darlington project, or referred to as T2D. So everyone knows it's the largest project in the state. It's a long-running project. It's a significant budget. So our review is specifically focusing on risk and issue management at this early stage of the project. We've targeted one area. We're reviewing whether DET has effective arrangements for managing its risk and issues related to delivering the project, main works under the Project Alliance Agreement. So we're focusing on the risk and issues in key areas such as project scope, scheduling, cost and quality. So what we're looking at is elements like governance arrangements, arrangements to identify, analyse and evaluate risks and issues, and processes to treat risks and issues. So that project, that review is well underway, well advanced, and we're looking to probably table in August on that review. And then finally, what we've also in the middle of doing at the moment, we're looking at, we're currently progressing a report on how SA government agencies progressing with recommendations we made in our performance audits completed between 2022 and 2024. So we've done a range of reviews, and this is the first time we've done a follow-up of how they're progressing with the recommendations. Once we've completed this report, I think we'll have a think about what it means for future reports and how we might report those and do a bit of an assessment. But just a few points to make about the review we're doing. It is essentially an agency self-assessment. We've written to agencies and asked them to just report a status of how their recommendations are going. And we're only doing some basic reasonableness checks there. It's not a follow-up performance audit where we're concluding whether recommendations have been implemented and operating effectively. We're just trying to do a survey essentially at a point in time of how recommendations are going. And we're also looking to get a basic understanding of the monitoring arrangements agencies have over audit recommendations. And as audit and risk committee members, you probably see that the monitoring processes that they come to the committee. So we're looking to understand whether there's any good practices there as well. And look, we're looking to aiming to table that one in September, that report as well. So that was all I had to cover today. If there's any questions before we have coffee. Hint. Thank you.
Well done, mate. Scared him off. Thanks for that, Salv. Now, we're going to adapt, not adopt. So we're going to somewhat change up our agenda, given we had such a rich source of information from Matt Moffat, which I think was really valuable for you guys in terms of starting to understand what it means for an agency to adapt and what that may mean for your risk management and your controls framework. So we're going to go and have some morning tea, because we think that's probably a really important part of the morning. And we'll try and get you back here. I think the agenda says we'll get you back in at 11:05. If you can start heading back in at 11:05, so we can start with John Chapman at 11:10, and then we'll close out with Andrew Corrigan, who was hoping I was going to say we're not going to have Andrew Corrigan, but we are. So join us out in the foyer for some tea and coffee. Thank you, everyone. I'm incredibly grateful that you all rushed back in so that we can move on with the agenda. It's now my enormous pleasure to introduce John Chapman, who's going to speak to us a little bit about Whyalla, but also about the activities of his office of the Industry Advocate. There's quite a detailed bio there. Suffice to say, I've known John for many years. In fact, I first ran into John around the turn of the century when he was working for then Treasurer Lucas, and I was a young Treasury executive trying to write budget speeches, and we would meet out the back of the office and try and discern what Rob Lucas had written in handwriting overnight that had to go into budget speeches. Quite a challenge. I could talk about that for hours. I'm not going to, because we don't have hours, so I'm going to throw to John and look forward to hearing what he has to say. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Andrew, for the opportunity and those kind words. We did work through a whole lot of things over the years, and I did worry me, though, turn of the century. I'm starting to think that makes me feel very old. I am old. I would like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Kaurna people and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. You did see my bio up there. I will give you a heads up, this is almost my swan song as Industry Advocate, which I finish in the role on the 30th of June this year. So I'll say a few things on the way out. Whyalla Regional Coordinator, that is likely to continue in a shape and form in the future. While we sell the steelworks. My world changed pretty much early 2025 in terms of my role as Industry Advocate, quietly minding my own business, and then the long arm of the Treasurer reaches out and says, we need you to go back to Whyalla. I did a lot of work up there in 2016 and 17 with the administration at the time, and there was familiarity, I think, in terms of dealing with the businesses. So since that time, since the 19th of February when the government pressed the button on legislation, which was the quickest legislation I've ever seen passed in my time in government and outside government, I've done something like, I will by the 30th of June, about 70 return trips, so virtually every week, bar a time when I did have some leave, and my good friend Kevin Cantley, who's represented here today, took over and did a very fine job. The initial part of it was all very much shock. It had been brewing for a long time. I think from a government perspective, there was enormous insight from the top down, from the Premier down, as to what had been going on. There were a number of quiet visits by the Premier and a number of ministers late 2024 as they assessed the environment and what needed to be done, and then obviously an enormous amount of work went on within government and within the key agencies, particularly Premier and Cabinet, as to where do we go from here. And you could obviously imagine trying to negotiate with the Commonwealth for a large bucket of money is not the easiest thing, and it's not the easiest thing to keep under wraps, but it was kept under wraps. Up to today, the sale process is well advanced, and you probably would have seen the Premier announce on Wednesday that we are now down to 2 bidders. although BlueScope retains the right of last refusal. But it is getting to the pointy end, and there will be a lot of work take place between now and the sale being settled and finalised sometime before the end of the year. That's as far as I can go with that. My role requires me to be in Whyalla 2 to 3 days a week, where I work with businesses, the community, local government, just to keep things under control. It's a very satisfying role because I think when you look at Whyalla, if there's no steelworks, there's really no reason for existence for Whyalla, and there's not much around it that you can actually transition to. The key task initially was the rollout of the emergency grant program, and I have to give great credit to the Department of State Development. In my role, there was a commitment across government that generally when I rang a CEO, I would get what I wanted as long as it was reasonable. The Department of State Development put the grants program together and we rolled that out. There was a lot of moving parts to that, helping businesses complete paperwork, and you can imagine in government, particularly for audit requirements, there needs to be a lot of paperwork. So a lot of emphasis was on helping people get through that process. I'm pleased to say 13.7 million went to 38 businesses in Whyalla and another 9.6 to other South Australian businesses. So total of 23 million pumped back into the economy, but particularly in Whyalla, that 13 million was a game changer and got the town, the city moving again. We also put in place, with my day role, a Whyalla Special Economic Zone and special tailored IPPs, industry participation plans, which require government agencies to move to this special tip when they're doing work in Whyalla above $220,000. A lot of my work is communicating, working with people, and you can see there's Sam Crafter from the Steelworks unit and Sebastian from Cordamentha, and it's probably not too many days go by when I don't talk to Cordamentha, and I work out of the government offices, which Sam's my landlord in Whyalla, so I have to be nice to him. On the ground, there were some gaps, particularly in the training area, and we ran a couple of specialist welding courses, and there was some gaps in TAFE's equipment. One of my artful forms is devilling around in places that probably don't necessarily concern me, and I found there was some equipment shortages, worked with TAFE, and then we managed to cobble together across a number of arms of government $1 million for that equipment to be put in place, and that's been audited. Things you hear, I had a whisper that there was a whole lot of machine shop equipment sitting in one of the old high schools. There's a brand new high school there. It's not quite brand new, but it's new. And managed to find that equipment, and it was a bit like a treasure trove. So I worked with One Steel, said, look, there's all this equipment here. Would you be interested in it? Yes, we would. So we've put that into the new apprentice training centre that they've set up, and they've brought on 27 apprentices this year. So hundreds of thousands of dollars equipment sitting idle is now being used for training. So a few other community and business issues that come up from time to time. So it does keep me out of trouble and mostly off the streets when I'm in Whyalla. Back to my day job, which is the role of industry advocate and the industry participation policy. The role is actually legislated. It's a statutory role. I won't bore you with details because I am conscious of time. In terms of our vision, this is what my team's put together in terms of why is this important. We want South Australian businesses right there at the forefront of government procurement, getting the maximum value. South Australian definition of a business is basically one that's based in the state and at least 50% or more of the workforce delivering on a contracted procurement is based in South Australia and are indeed residents. The policy, in simple terms, supply inputs, employment, investment. This is about economic development, and our role is to monitor and work with that process. Where we get involved, the pre-tender, working with agencies, reviewing the acquisition plans that are coming up, which the agencies are required to prepare, providing advice back to the agencies, During the contract negotiation process, we don't get involved in the tender process or selection. That's up to the agencies. But during the negotiation process, we work to develop a finalised document, and then post-contract, we work to ensure that what's been promised will be delivered. You can see at the bottom there that the influence in terms of the procurement can be anywhere between 15 and 30%. The 30%, for example, does apply to Whyalla procurements. Simply, everything over $55,000 has to have involvement of our office, be it a checklist, or above 550 you get into the more complex areas of a standard plan or a tailored plan. In terms of the detail, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it is important that we have structured plans which should form part of the contractual arrangements so that the businesses can be held to account, if necessary, by both us and indeed the agency for delivering against the commitments that they've promised. I've had to issue a number of direction notices as a result of failure to report by businesses. I issued one to a listed public company earlier this year, which you would have thought would have done the right thing. Previously, I think we'd had 13 different interactions and they just ignored it. I'm pleased to say that obviously when my letter hit, I suspect they got some legal advice pretty quickly, and within 24 hours we had the answers that we needed. And it wasn't hard for them, it's just they didn't feel that they needed to do it. In terms of the scale of what we're dealing with, currently there are about, these figures are as at 30 June last year, there are about 700 procurements that what we'll term in play, and you can see some pretty big dollars in that. So in play means they're lodged in the system, may not have made it to the start of the tender stage. The ones that we're currently looking at in terms of the contracts have been let and they are in progress, something like 1,400, and you can see that translates to a rather large number. So I think, and I would say that our role is pretty important in terms of making sure that we get the maximum benefit to South Australian businesses. Importantly, our office plays a big part in trying to improve Aboriginal economic participation. We're, as Audit and Risk Committees, I think you'd probably all be aware, chairs I should say, of the Closing the Gap initiatives the government has, and economic development of Aboriginal businesses is a key role. We have a person dedicated to that, who works with agencies but also particularly the Aboriginal businesses to try and maximise the opportunity there. And importantly for agencies is that you can contract up to $550,000 with one quote from an Aboriginal business, which is on our list. So we're trying to pave the way there to maximise the value. You can see the growth has been pretty good. As at 30 June last year, 176.4 million. That was up from 141. We're hoping that that will further improve by the 30th of June. So it might be a question as chairs that you might want to ask your CE or staff appearing at an Audit and Risk Committee meeting what they are doing as an agency in this space, because it is a very important government commitment. In terms of what's driving demand, touched on earlier, River Torrens to Darlington, the T2D. That's on a workforce basis, but from an industry advocate basis, I meet monthly. It was fortnightly up until about 3 months ago with the Alliance to work through where they're up to in terms of their procurement, their workforce commitments, because there's a key workforce commitment of 90% South Australian labour, 20% apprentices, trainees, Aboriginal workforce and long-term unemployed. So we're holding them to account on that. We have a similar structure set in place for the new Women's and Children's, where we meet with them monthly as well. That's going through its own process at the moment for the main part of the build. So that's our way of keeping across it rather than just getting reports every 6 months and hoping for the best. How we help business, pretty simple. We're there, we're available, we're on the website. We have our Meet the Buyer, and I'll do a shameless plug for that at the end of this session. But what can you do as Audit and Risk Committee chairs and your members of your committees? Importantly, what's the agency and business doing in terms of procurement? Ask the questions. Government spends an enormous amount of money, and all agencies have procurement functions. Generally, sometimes one agency will do it for another. There will be an arrangement where there's an agreement. But as Audit and Risk Committee chairs, you should be across the procurement. How's that shaping up? What's the framework that's in place? Are they complying with our policies? The industry advocate policies. Because I can give you a tip, not everyone does. And we do spend a lot of time, it's a bit like a rat in the wheel, educating and working with agencies on why they need to take heed of the policy, and indeed Treasurer's Instruction 18, which relates to procurement and which has the force of law. So these are important things that agencies need to be aware of, because they're required to report breaches to TI18, Treasurer's Instructions generally. What work is the agency doing in terms of Aboriginal business and promoting that, working towards achieving some of the outcomes we need in terms of closing the gap? What's the CE doing in terms of exemptions? The CE does have the capacity to exempt procurement and go to another state and go to a direct procurement, and there may be some very good reasons for that, but as Audit and Risk chairs and your committees should be looking at that and asking the questions. How many have been signed off? Why? Where does that fit into it? Just general statistics. How many procurements are being undertaken? Have you got the right structure in place, the staffing to deliver that and ensure compliance? The issue of debriefs. Recently I've been getting some feedback that people will seek, unsuccessful tenderers will seek debriefs from agencies and they don't get it. They don't even get a phone call back. Now, this is an essential part. If someone is unsuccessful, they put a lot of time, a lot of effort and sometimes a lot of cost to get to the starting line. The least we can do from a government perspective is provide them the debrief on why they weren't successful. And I know there are some constraints around that, but you can navigate those quite successfully. We also encourage successful tenderers to get a debrief, because that will confirm why they were successful, so that they know okay, that worked, we can do that, as opposed to not quite sure what it was about ours that made the difference. Complaints on procurement processes. As Audit and Risk Committee, I don't think it's unreasonable. You could ask and say, well, how many complaints do you get? Can you provide a briefing to us? And what are they for? And that provides that level of oversight. And there are probably a whole lot of other things, but just think about procurement. It's spending public funds. So again, there's an accountability aspect there which ties directly to an Audit and Risk Committee, because no one wants to be asleep at the wheel when something's bad happened within the agency that should have been picked up. I'm conscious that I am close to time, but a shameless plug for our Meet the Buyer, which will be held on the 19th of August. We have these annually, and normally they are at the Entertainment Centre. Last year's event we ramped up and we brought in industry associations, worked with the South Australian Business Chamber, and we had nearly double the registrations that we had the previous year, which was fantastic, and the Premier opened it. This year, with the Department of State Development's help, we've moved it to the Convention Centre, and we will have not only government agencies available to meet with the public and industry who want to sell to government, but we're also looping in terms of the private sector. And so we'll have some of the key sectors, defence, we've got BAE, for example, mining, BHP and Santos have already signed up. On the food side, we've got Thomas Foods, manufacturing, Detmold, I've just signed off on them today. So it'll be much bigger because people who want to sell to government, often they will be wanting to sell the same things to private sectors. So we're broadening that out, maximising the opportunity for businesses in South Australia to do business in South Australia. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Do
John.
you want questions? Or
Yeah, if there are questions.
Happy to take questions if we've got a few minutes, I think, hopefully. No?
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And thank you for the outstanding work you're doing for the state. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Andrew Corrigan. We're going to jump back to slide 44, hopefully. There you go. For our update on data and technology. So Andrew's been looking forward to this all morning.
Yep. Okay, I've got exactly 0 minutes, so I'm going to be really quick. So my presentation today was meant to be on legacy systems. So every few years we actually look at the legacy systems which are in the various agencies. Cutting to the chase, this is a detailed definition of what a legacy system is. Essentially, a legacy system is a system that is outdated, that needs to be replaced. It might be out of support, might not meet the needs of business. A good example was the presentation that Matt did in terms of Masterpiece being replaced by Oracle. So this slide just had listed some of the ICT risks associated with legacy systems. Apart from the obvious cybersecurity risks, if a system's no longer supported, that can mean some security risks. Legacy systems tend to be unstable. They tend to have high maintenance costs, poor performance. I've got workforce and skills risks, and that's associated with, in many cases, as systems age, people move on. You have challenges actually getting people who can actually support the system. A good example was the Masterpiece one, where that was an old mainframe system. A lot of times they can have limited innovation and agility, so they're not able to easily meet future requirements of the business. They're not able to easily integrate with other systems. And there can be data quality issues and compliance risks associated with running these legacy systems. Every time we do a review within the agencies on legacy systems, we find them. And that's because of the various challenges that agencies have in relation to trying to replace them. So apart from the obvious replacement costs, there are a number of reasons why agencies still have legacy systems. Apart from limited budgets, you've also need a lot of resourcing to upgrade some systems. I could just basically refer to Matt's presentation with some of the challenges that they've got in relation to moving to Oracle. And I talked about retraining effort. New systems usually have new processes. People have to know how to use the system. And there's also integration issues as well. Sometimes you cannot upgrade the operating system of a server, or you can't upgrade a database, which are legacy, because the application that's using those systems are legacy and can't adapt to the new operating system. So sometimes there are some really valid reasons why legacy systems exist, despite all the risks. So when we did our review of legacy systems, we're about to issue a report next month. We understand we don't just we don't just have a recommendation, just replace all these systems, because we realise there's a number of challenges in doing so. So our focus on our reviews has also been, what are you doing in the interim to manage the associated risks? So Do you have good visibility of what assets you've got? Is it flagged that they're legacy? And if they're flagged as legacy, what mitigating controls do you have in place? Is it going into your risk register? Is it being considered in terms when you do budget allocations that you need to replace certain systems? And is that appropriate governance occurring? You can have a great risk register, but if it's not actually then flowing up to the necessary governance committees, etc., then it's not really worth the paper that's written on. So you need to have things which are that you're picking up highlighted to governance committees, such as the Audit and Risk Committee. So I'm trying to fast track all this. So this is probably the main slide that I was going to spend a lot of time on, and that was what you should look for. Now, in many cases, if you're especially if you're in the Audit Risk Committee for a large agency, you're not going to get given detailed asset listings. Some of the large agencies will have thousands of assets. I don't just mean applications, you've got operating systems, you've got databases, you've got virtualization systems, you've got hardware devices. So you're not going to get given a listing of all these things. Hopefully you would at least have a line item in your risk register that says you've got legacy systems. What I would hope that in your role that you're able to do is to get some comfort that if you drill down to that line item within your risk register, that you have some comfort that your agency does have visibility of what assets they've got. They've got visibility of which assets are legacy or coming up to legacy, and that the associated risks are discussed and then put into risk registers and then going up to governance committees, especially if the risks above the tolerance level, because you'll probably just see in a line item saying legacy systems, your inherent residual risk, your risk tolerance, but that's usually a summary of all your environment. You'd like to think that for individual legacy systems, especially if they're internet facing and things like that they're actually raised to governance committees, raised to management, etc., so that when there is funding available, that those systems will be given the necessary priority. So I think I did pretty well cutting that down into a few minutes. But that's pretty much the crux of what I was trying to say, was that your agency probably does have legacy systems. They should be flagging them, and hopefully you've got some assurance that they're managing them appropriately. And questions? I was actually impressed.
I think that the important thing to recognise is that sort of the review that we've done of a number of agencies has shown that there's thousands of these legacy systems, whether they be actual applications, databases, or operating systems. Yep. They each have their own inherent risks, and some of them are quite extreme. And the fact that you might have risk registers that have one line item that says legacy systems and don't worry about it, it's managed, is a bit of a fallacy. You need the capacity to understand how it is that your organisation is managing those underlying risks, because some of them can be quite extreme. We recognise that there's not the money to replace all these systems, it's just a reality of government. So some decisions need to be made in terms of how those risks are going to be managed, and that's the point we'll be making and drawing out in this forthcoming report. I've stolen Andrew's thunder. Is there any questions for Andrew?
Andrew, I just noted that the legacy systems are working often relate to payments that are made through grants or other payments. They don't go through the old Masterpiece AP. And there's quite a lot of money that leaves the government, not through that process. Yep, I don't know if your report draws on that.
Certainly we note that there's a number of legacy grant systems, but there's equally legacy patient record systems, patient management systems. There's a whole range of systems, but you're right, Libby, there's, in terms of financial controls, there are systems outside of Masterpiece and outside of the general control framework of the new Oracle that will require ongoing oversight. Les?
That's my whole home, Vicky. Who else is here?
Who else is here? That's right. Lots. What I was going to ask is, you mentioned the report. When will that be released? Or have you, or is that sort of
I'm hoping
embargo?
it's the 16th of June. If that doesn't occur, we never talked about that. we're hoping for the 16th of June. Certainly everything's been wrapped up. We're just finalising our internal processes in terms of making it more readable, basically.
That's the exact date of our next ARC, but that's fine. Thank you.
Who else is here from Treasury? Chris, you've got any questions? Very good. Thank you, Andrew. That was awesome. I'm conscious that we've motored through the agenda today and we've changed the order and that sort of thing. I'm more than happy to take any questions, any more general questions that people might have. Otherwise, I do take the opportunity to thank you very much for the work you do in agencies. It is very important and we do value it enormously, which is why we hold these sessions, to support you. But I will, if there are questions, take the opportunity now, or always feel free to contact me through the office or any of our offices as well. We're more than happy to have discussions at any time. Thank you very much for your attendance.